We are live, people. We are live in the house. Hope all is well. So, okay, well, here we go. Heroes Lecture Part 2, version 6, believe it or not. We're refining and building and adding and tweaking and modifying. So, hope you like this version. So, we had the end of the last lecture discussing this phenomenon called the hero's story, the hero's journey. And this is popularized by Joseph Campbell in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he basically, since a boy, he read mythologies, and as he grew up, he realized there was this pattern through all of them, this narrative pattern, this very similar plots that unfolded, themes that unfolded. And he called it mankind's one great story. And we see this story today. We see it in ancient cultures, we see it all around the world in ancient cultures, but most interestingly, we're still telling the story today. If we talked about if you turn on an NBA game or any kind of sporting event, if you watch any epic movie, you're seeing the hero story at work. We don't just tell the story, we celebrate it. It's a core anchor, it's a core piece of our culture. And it's amazing that it happens, this ancient story occurs in such a modern, you could say non-religious, kind of atheistic culture, one that's inherently suspicious of religion or ancient mythologies or stories, that to speak into our lives and to tell us something about the world that's relevant. Nowadays we trust in the religion of science. Scientists are the new priests. We trust what they say. We look to them to tell us about the world and the future and how to live and how to be. That's the real practical stuff. And so I made the bold claim last lecture that the reason why we've told this story across all generations, across all cultures, and of course in our culture today, is that this story is our story. That somehow we have perceived some mystical world beyond the veil, some reality about life, that there's a shape to the universe, and that shape is a narrative, that the universe is story, and that there is a story waiting to be told through our lives, that we were created for the story, and that if we don't tell this story, we don't take this narrative journey, then we will always be unfulfilled. That in some sense our lives will be a tragedy of a loss of meaning, a tragedy of a loss of hope, of connection, of destiny, really, that we lose our sense of what we were made for. And those are big claims. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't try to explain it in the language of today, in the language of science. So that's what we're going to try to do. Do we see evidence of this story? Do we see this mystical signature of the universe that I claim is there, that I claim to be there, in our very own physiology, in the language of science? So, strap in, lean back, get ready for this ride. Here we go. We're going to talk about the hero story within our physiology. So what is our physiology? How would we define it? What should we focus on? Well, you could say that our physiology is comprised of two parts, and it's a legendary duality, a storied duality, one that's been written about forever, ad infinitum, in multiple layers of literature and science, and that is this: mind and body. You should be very familiar, right? Mind, body, head over heart, conscious versus unconscious, right? And to get technical, which we will, when we're talking mind, body, thinking over emotions, what we're really talking about is, brain, body, or to be very specific, these frontal lobes of the brain, the very specific part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which sits on top of the motor cortex. So we've developed this prefrontal cortex, a very, very small part of our physiology. And even within that, it gets more specific. We get to something called the planning center, which occurs in the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So this is a small part of our physiology. You could think of it like the rudder of a giant ship. Got a huge ship, tiny rudder, but that's what steers the ship, right? This is that small part that steers a ship, they call it a planning center. And you got to be careful with these names. They're very kind of innocent and understated, but the planning center, I mean, think about, I mean, if that's the only place we make plans, I mean, think about how we do anything. Getting up and going to the bathroom is a plan when you think about it. It's a very small, basic plan, but there's almost nothing that we do in life that's deliberate and accomplished, deliberate and structured, that doesn't involve a plan. So this is the key piece of our brain, the key piece of conscious awareness that kind of allows us to move through the world. So this DLPFC, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, I will talk about this first. It's essentially a signal interpreter. It's like a pilot in a cockpit. It sits at the hub of numerous signaling channels, and all these signals pour into this centralized location, which is the DLPFC. And just like a pilot, it reads it. It can, it has like a readout of the body, and then it has a readout of the world. Just like pilot looks at the altitude and the wind speed and all this, and then it looks at like a fuel gauge and the speed of the plane. And so the dorsolateral has access to like your five senses. It receives signals from your vision, your sight, your vision, your hearing, and then also receives bodily signals. So when we talk about the body, mind over body, we're talking about basically the autonomic system. Oof. Ooh, excuse me. Speaking of signals, some pain signals from my left shoulder. The autonomic system, which is kind of like your hardware, all the organs, all the stuff that you don't even know how it works, but it still works somehow. That's your autonomic. And then also your limbic system, which is kind of like your emotional centers, your instincts, all the unconscious ideation and urges that you have. So the DLPFC and then the rest of the ship. Now, the DLPFC has been called a flexible rule-setting device, and this is probably the most technical term for the DLPFC, because that really gets down to the fundamental, the most basic unit of what it does. And I'll give you an example. So there's something called the Stroop task, and this refers to an experiment, and we'll just kind of loosely refer to it because I don't fully understand it, but it's basically this. If you sit someone down and have them read off flashcards, just basic words like book, house, chair, table, whatever, and then halfway through you change it to, instead of reading the words, I want you to read the colors of the words, red, blue, yellow, green, there's invariably going to be some kind of a slowdown. Like they're kind of moving right along, reading off the cards, and then suddenly they have to read the colors, and there's sort of a switch. There's a slowdown, and then like a transition, and then a speed up again. And that's your DLPFC changing a rule, flexible rule setting device. Now, in this case, the rule is like a command. It's a command rule. You have to do this or you have to do that. But you could think of rules as a lot of things. Certainly that's one definition of a rule, but a rule could also be like an aspect. For example, if I walk off a cliff, I'm going to fall. That's a rule, the law of gravity. So rules can be aspects or descriptors, but they can also be commands or motivations or goals. Things that you want. Those are rules. I want a donut. That's kind of like a rule. And the DLPFC is able to absorb, a multitude of rules, right? Flexible rule setting. Again, a very understated definition. It's able to be flexible and take into account a myriad of matrices of rule sets. And it's able to arrange these rules into a contextual environment or world, kind of like a unified whole through which or with which you can accomplish what you're trying to do. So like the environment is a whole set of rules, like the ocean is blue. That's kind of like a rule, right? So you have a myriad of rules, and there's also a myriad of rules under here, beneath the hood. So the DLPFC, in terms of the autonomic system, so the DLP, in terms of the autonomic system, the DLPFC is connected. So in terms of like the hardware in your body, your prefrontal has awareness of three main areas. Now it doesn't have awareness of like how your bladder works or like even how your fingers move. I don't know how I'm doing this. I just know that I am doing it. So, but one process or three processes that you're consciously aware of would be your heart, your lungs, and your stomach. And so, in terms of like how you make plans, the awareness of your physical state of the body, you're aware of those three centers, and that's pretty famous. Like if you get really excited, your heart starts beating faster, you get this little wonderful jitteriness in your stomach, or if you're really scared or dreading something, you feel it in your stomach, or if you're really like out of breath, right? You're aware of these centers, and that helps you make plans, right? All these signals go into the planning center, because when you're trying to make plans, you need to be aware of a lot of different things. I mean, basically, you want to know what the world is like. You want to understand, like, if you have an urge and you're trying to fulfill that urge, you need to understand what in the world can fulfill that, and then how you're going to go about acquiring that thing. Again, making plans. Not only that, but you need to map out your emotions and your instincts and translate that into a desire that can be fulfilled. So the DLPFC is this very amazing, brilliant, right, this rule setting device that takes signals and then turns them into like a matrices of complex rules that we can understand and move forward with. So it's like a master interpreter. And the DLPFC is essentially linguistic. Like you talk yourself through things. Your conscious awareness is essentially like in the form of a language. So that's the rudder in the ship. That's how that works. It's the pilot in the cockpit and interprets signals. Now, in terms of the rest of the body, right, the autonomic and your limbic systems, it is sort of the exact opposite of your DLPFC. It is no less sophisticated, but it's sophisticated in a much different way. Oof. So it is, oh my goodness, I am getting such a sophisticated signal. Oh yeah. From my left shoulder blade is this kind of a stabbing. Yeah, so your body is able to generate very sophisticated signals. This pain signal, for example, is very, very nuanced. I can feel where it is specifically, although it's kind of hard to pinpoint. It's a stabbing. I'm sorry, I don't know, I'm just going in real time here. It's a stabbing pain, and it wants me to try to find a better position. I feel it's almost like a dampening of circulation. Like I'm just saying, like, we're capable of all sorts of sensations. And even if you just consider our sight, our vision, for example, like we can determine or differentiate about 1 million different colors, like tints and shades. 1 million. I mean, this is a crazy number. Like I remember back in the day when computers first came out, they were just green. Like there was just a green screen. And then one day they came out with 16 color VGA. 16 color. I was like 10 years old. I couldn't believe it. I was playing King's Quest 1 or something, and I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. And then it came out with 256 colors, and that just like my brain exploded when I saw that. And now it's like you have 40,000 color monitors, and we can see 1 million colors, which is insane. I mean, think of even the color of gray. Like we can discern, I don't know, like at least 50 shades. 50 shades of gray, right? Did I get that right? Anyway, so we have a highly sophisticated signaling center, signaling creator. And that has to do with our emotions, our senses to build out the world, and also our desires. Like they're very subtle signals. Like think when you're like picking out clothes, like what are you doing there? You're taking it's non-linguistic, this non-linguistic signal, and you're picking out like between textures and shapes and styles, and it's very enjoyable. Like it's very interesting. Now, right, the DLPFC, or sorry, the autonomic and limbic systems are notoriously very fast reacting. Think fight or flight. It's kind of the animal. It's your instincts, your first reaction. And a good illustration of how it sort of relates to planning is you can, like, if you suppress someone's PFC, like they have these powerful magnets now that they hook up to your brain, and they actually like suppress or shut down areas of your brain, which is so crazy and weird. But if you take away someone's PFC functioning, what happens is their motor functioning becomes supremely acute and skilled. So the motor cortex doesn't need the PFC to execute motor functions and or physical tasks. So if I suppress your PFC, for example, and give you a gun, and then set up a bunch of targets, what'll happen is you're going to hit those targets with like outrageous accuracy. You'll just be a shooting machine. But one thing you can't do is I can't tell you which targets to hit and which to not hit. I can't be like, hit the yellow ones but not the red ones. That's a rule. Like, you can't set that type of rule. So, you're just going to shoot everything, which is a problem, but you're going to be 100% accurate, which is also kind of a problem. So just to say that, like, your body, this signaling creator, although it's an absolute virtuoso at automatic functioning, which is the signal generation and also motor movements, it's horrible at generating plans. Because the PFC is an extension of the motor cortex, it kind of thinks in terms of movement. And really, when it comes to movement, there's only 3 options when you encounter a signal. And that is what? Move forward, stay still, or move backwards. Think like flight or fight, right? We're all familiar with that. And so that's incredibly simple, kind of generic, generalizing. You could think of it as highly non-generalizing, non-differentiating, non-contextualizing, right? It's just a very blunt response system. And you know this when you kind of encounter a strong reaction to something. Like, let's say you're driving down the street, someone cuts you off. You get filled with like a limbic rage, right? Your limbic system goes into overdrive, and I don't know why we're like this, but we just start going on the warpath like we're ready to kill this person. And that would be an extreme version of move forward, move forward, attack. And oftentimes these reactions that we have are, again, notoriously non-contextualized. They're inappropriate to the context, and if we manifest these emotions to the world, or to the person in front of us or the people around us, usually results in some form of pain, right? Like a rejection, people look down on you, it's frowned upon, you're alienated, ostracized from the community. So, just to say, like, our limbic and autonomic systems, like, they're very kind of blunt objects when it comes to creating plans. But they're absolutely amazing and brilliant signal generators, and also with motor movement. Anything that's automatic and instinctual that just happens without the need to think through it, it's amazing, an amazing signal generator. And so this is the source of your emotions, of your desires. But then it interacts with this DLPFC. So there's this coordination that has to happen, because if life were super easy, we could just let our reactions lead. What happens? I mean, that's kind of like what a 2-year-old does. So 2-year-olds are famously non-differentiating. They're non-contextualizing. They're just kind of beholden to whatever signal is being broadcasted at the moment. Like, if they're sad, they're just really sad, and they're really happy, then they're really happy, and then they're hungry, and then they're tired, and they cycle through all these different sensations with no overarching centralizing motivation. Nothing is contextualized or ordered or organized or on a single purpose. They're just blasting through all these different states, and then the parent just kind of like plays the role of their PFC and says, okay, well, you're tired, but and you're hungry, well, you should take a nap first, then you'll eat, or however it is. And 2-year-olds are famously unable to function in the world. Like, if you just leave one in a kitchen full of food, they'll die. Like, they'll die of starvation because they don't know how to figure things out. So, I have a lot of cat hair, by the way, in here. That's why it's like my nose. Anyways, so basically these two systems have to coordinate somehow in order for us to advance successfully in the world. And let's talk about how that happens. We're going to use a very simple example, but one that should be familiar. And, and you know what? Let's go into a quote. And then we'll come back to this quote later. So, the purpose of thinking is to let the ideas die instead of us dying. The purpose of thinking is to let the ideas die instead of us dying. And to illustrate this a little bit, we'll come back to that quote, just kind of let that simmer. Let's pretend we're in a restaurant. Here we are, we're in this lovely restaurant. I think it's called like the Diner Bar or something like that. This is somewhere in Texas, Austin, Texas. And here we have this lovely menu. And let's pretend that we're in a restaurant. Now remember that during that Stroop experiment that there's this kind of pause between tasks. If we switch from one task to another, or switch from one rule set to another rule set, there's this pause. Now what happens during that pause is the prefrontal is actually in this reciprocal conversation with the rest of the body, this DLPFC. It's connected to those three autonomic centers, the heart, the lungs, and the gut, and it sends this calming signal. So there is this reciprocal conversation. Right, so it sends this calming signal, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'm a waiter now in a restaurant, and I notice this all the time now, that when people are looking at a menu, there's this quietness that kind of falls over the table. They're very focused, they're silent, and their eyes are moving, but they're very still. And that's what happens when you're accessing different rules is this prefrontal is sending this calming signal down to the rest of your body. So it's kind of like, it doesn't just receive signals, it sends signals, so it's kind of like this orchestrator of the body. Okay, so we're here in a restaurant, and we're trying to what? We're trying to receive signals and then develop different rules. And right now the motivation, the command rule, is that I want to find something that's the most satiating. And that's definitional. So it could be like the most delicious. It could be what helps me lose weight. It could be, it's any number of different motivations. And that's partially, I don't know how the rule, I think must be some kind of conversation with how these rules get set. But basically, as I'm looking through this, the kind of primitive reaction is I'm looking for something tasty, right? I'm looking to see what kind of shrimp toast. That's kind of over on this side here. Shrimp toast. I don't like shrimp, and I guess it caught my attention because I don't like that. I'm like, that sounds kind of gross. So again, I'm just like receiving signals. I'm not really thinking through it. Let's see. Dayboat catch. I might be in the mood for that. I'm kind of in the mood for something light. Again, I'm letting the signal guide me, and now I'm in this what's called the weird conversation. I'm taking my linguistic DLPFC, and I'm receiving these non-linguistic kind of colors and textures and tastes, instinctual just sensations to let it highlight items on the menu for me to see kind of like what I'm interested in. And this is the things that are highlighted are the things that I think will satiate me. So dayboat catch, definitely not turnip cakes. Wow, I am attracted to novelty. You almost want to get a turnip cake just to see what the hell's going on. A bacon jam? Here we go, turnip cakes and a bacon jam. That's pretty interesting. So, right. So let's focus in on this dayboat catch. And so what happens here is that I'm following the signal. I'm like, okay, my body seems to be telling me that the dayboat catch might be sufficiently satiating. We have a salsa verde. Okay, I like that, right? So now I'm looking at further description. I'm trying to look for more and more rule sets to try to triangulate and determine if this in fact is going to yield what it's promising, right? I'm taking the signal, now I'm analyzing it. We got clams, that's good. Potatoes and beans, that sounds pretty interesting. Salsa verde especially, because I like tart things. And so I'm kind of like visualizing what a salsa verde is. I'm accessing my hippocampus, which is my memory. The DLPFC has access to that. And I have history of eating clams, potatoes, and beans. So I'm contextualizing, and I'm thinking maybe dayboat catches a run. Maybe this is the thing. And there's a bit of predictive modeling that's happening right now. So as I'm quietly searching through these sensations and trying to remember the different rules that I've had in the past, and coming up with a matrix of rules to model out what the world will be like, right? This is predictive. I don't know what the future will hold. The dayboat catch, what will it look like? I'm not sure, but it sounds nice. Dayboat's a nice word. Maybe it's a fresh fish. Salsa verde, right? I'm picturing what their salsa verde looks like. I'm also applying a rule about the color of this menu. I like how it looks. They kind of have my trust because aesthetically I very much agree with how the color of this menu and how they wrote it out. It's kind of minimal, but it's pleasant. So I'm just applying all these different rules, and I'm modeling out what dayboat catch will look like. Now, also what I'm trying to model out is these signals or sensations saying what I'm in the mood for. And that's also predictive. I don't exactly know. I mean, it could be that the swordfish frites, that sounds pretty good. A caper raisin sauce. I'm not so sure about capers and raisins. That sounds pretty risky to me. So I'm I'm skeptical of the combination of that, so that kind of starts to rule that out. So, but it could be that's the best thing on there. Like whatever this hunger is, whatever this desire is, maybe it will be fulfilled by a caper raisin sauce. But my DLPFC is like, I think that's kind of a low probability. That's sort of a high risk item. The New York strip is way too rich and way too expensive, right? I'm applying a rule set about price. One thing that's nice about this menu is that there's not that much gluten on here, and I'm kind of trying to go low gluten. Again, that's another rule set I'm trying to apply. And also, I want to gain muscle, so I want... So anyways, I'm applying all these different rule sets, right? And that's helping me triangulate on what will be the best reward. Now, when I'm talking about protein and gaining weight and non-gluten, that is a time frame preference. So I'm trying to model out not just the eating of the meal, the sensation of the flavor, but also the feeling that I'll have and the consequences of the food that I'm eating. And all those things play into the formula of satiation, which is pretty definitional. Like if this was 3 in the morning, bro, I don't care about no protein. I'm just trying to like get some tasty food, and then tomorrow I face whatever consequences there are, and I accept that. I think by and large, I may regret that, but I'll be like, you know what, it was fun. We were kind of just experiencing the moment. But because I'm sober and it's the evening, I want to eat something that will be good for the long term. So I'm placing a value on the long term benefit, or I guess reward from this meal. So what's happening now is basically I'm kind of imagining, right? It's very automatic, but I'm just modeling out this world, and then I'm modeling out my desires, and I'm trying to see which potential future is going to satisfy this desire. It's kind of like a movie reel, but it's like almost like a sensory movie reel. And I implicitly know the steps, the order of actions that I have to take to acquire this dayboat catch. It's actually pretty simple. I just have to wait for a waiter somewhere, and hopefully he comes by, and then once he's at the table, I get to say something like, he'll say, "Are you ready to order?" I'll say, "Yes." I'll ask him, "Well, what's the dayboat catch of the day?" He'll tell me maybe it's salmon. I'll be like, "Great, I'll do the salmon dayboat catch." And then, I get ready in anticipation for my potential reward. I don't know what the dish will look like, so I have some excitement, some fear, and wondering, will this delight me? Will this disappoint me? I don't know. This is the adventure of dining out, and it's wonderful because the stakes are kind of low, but they're high enough that it makes it kind of fun. Now, one thing that would happen, though, is, or like, yeah, that what if I asked him for the dayboat catch, and he goes, "Oh, we just ran out of the dayboat catch." What happens? What is that? That's a rule change. That the world that I had constructed, the rule was I can get a dayboat catch. But now I learned that rule is not there, and that rule is actually pretty germane to this physiology that I've orchestrated around the eventual acquisition of this particular dish, of the reward. I've invested resources into this story, this future scenario, and it's almost like I've generated a future Steve. It's like, this is the Steve that eats the dayboat catch, and now that possibility has been destroyed. I think about the time that I invested in this, the hope that I put into it, the neurological structures and physiology that I've invested in anticipating this dayboat catch, and what happens. What's my reaction to this sudden rule change? Kind of trauma, disappointment, rage, limbic rage, frustration, exasperation, just kind of like you think of the inner 2-year-old just, banging the table and crying. That's what I want to do. But what's happening is that there's this other part, my thinking brain, accessing my hippocampus, going, wait a second, I kind of have this hierarchy of needs where my need to not lose social value by having a tantrum in a restaurant and disgracing myself is higher than my desire to express these unpleasant emotions. And my DLPFC is frantically trying to quell the signaling of my body so that I don't have a moment, and trying to say, okay, it's okay, like trying to apply towards a higher story, like your life is still great, life will continue, and then maybe you get spiritual with it, like this narrative of, well, obviously, God did not want you to have the day boat catch, and maybe there's something else on the menu that he meant for you to have. Maybe that day boat catch would not have sat, so there's all these different ways that your DLPFC can kind of access different rule sets so that you can be more adaptive to the situation, to your surroundings, and to the future, essentially. And so, yeah, like as I'm accessing these different rule sets, my limbic system is sort of on overdrive, and I'm trying to like quell it, and it just takes a moment for my prefrontal to send this calming signal and kind of calm myself down and go, okay, it's going to be all right. And in real life, this probably happens in a few minutes, and like I'm an adult, so I'm able to deal with this sudden rule change. And so then what happens? I have to go back to the menu now, a little bit exasperated, and I enter into this meditative phase, and we start the process all over again. And now we have to envision a totally different future. Well, I mean, not totally, but a different dish anyway. And this Steve that was going to have the day boat catch has now been mourned and put to bed. The physiology invested has been unwound, and now we're getting ready for something else to fill that desire. We're trying to look forward to a different future. And truth be told, I'll probably get the rabbit dirty rice. I was peeping that as well. And so this is the process. This is how these two systems coordinate. And so let's go back to this quote: "The purpose of thinking is to let the ideas die instead of us dying." Right? I mean, think about that. So what we could have done is we could have just ordered every item on the menu and then tasted each item, and then that way we could have been really sure. We don't even need to model out the future. But there's a lot of problems with that. It's highly inefficient. I only have so much stomach space. What I eat in the beginning will be different than what I eat in the end because I'm full, right? There's all these variables. It's just not very practical. And that's just a simple example. Like, we have one shot at life. Should I get this job or that job? Should I move from this city or that city? I can't sit and move to every single city to find out which city I love the most. So what is this? What are we doing here? This coordination between our two systems is absolutely a survival strategy. It's a way to move through life. The way that your DLPFC coordinates all these desires and sensations, as well as the current state of your physiology, so that you understand what you're capable of, what you're able to acquire. In the case of the restaurant, it's quite easy. I just have to tell, as long as I can speak and communicate with the waiter, I can order this food. It's also, determining what you actually want, and then predictively modeling out the world to see what is going to fulfill that desire in the most accurate way possible. It's an adaptive instinct. This coordination, this dance, is the critical dance that allows you to move successfully into the future. And what we did is, instead of tasting every single menu item, we kind of played a movie reel of us eating every menu item. We tried to simulate what that dish would be like, and then we had to make our best guess. So this is the key way in which we adapt to the world. This is adaptive. And in terms of what this process is, you may have already guessed, but I mean, what's a simple way to describe this process, this very complex coordination dance that we do? What's a really simple word? Oh, it's one word. What do you think it is? Yeah, it's a story. It's called a story. What we just did is we told multiple stories. The story of me eating the chicken, eating the day boat catch, eating the rabbit, right? Eating the turnip cakes. It's like, these are all stories. Because it's like, what do? The DLPFC, right? We model out the world. We construct the world full of different rules that are relevant to this desire that we have, this motivation. By the way, we've modeled out our motivation. It's kind of this concurrent coordination that happens. We're modeling out our desires, we're looking out at the world, we're modeling out the world, then maybe we update the desires, and then we try to figure out what's the correct sequence of actions that will allow us to acquire this this goal that we've determined is the right goal. We go back to our autonomic system, our physiology. Are we in fact able of acquiring this? Can we in fact get that job? Do we have the resources to move to that other city? Can we get that girl or that guy? We're modeling out the world, we're modeling out ourselves, we're modeling out desires, and then we're running scenarios in our head. This is the world, this is me moving through the world, right? That's a story. This is the world, this is right. That's what a story is. Here's the setting, here's the main character, here's his motivations, here's the reciprocal dance of all of those models going on. Like maybe throughout the story he learns that instead of falling in love with this woman, he realized he needed to really fall in love with that woman. You know, that's a rule change. And so stories are this very technical physiological process. It's a biological process. Going back to this quote, right? Now, if you think of this in terms of, I have my picture while I'm talking. In terms of like mosquitoes, so mosquitoes have a totally different way of going through life. Now, they don't have a DLPFC. I don't even know if they have a motor core. I don't know what their brain is like at all, but they don't have a PFC where they sit and they sit and think and visualize, oh, what would happen if I flew into this window and then blah blah. What they do instead of imagining multiple copies, they just actually lay 1 million eggs. They make 1 million copies of themselves, and then the variation of gene determines what they all do. Some fly through the window, some fly into the cave. Some fly into the light bulb, some fly into the car grill, Most of them die, but some of them succeed, and those are the ones that have successfully adapted to the future. They procreate and make more copies. Whereas what we do instead is we imagine copies. I said the prefrontal cortex it's like an extension on top of the motor cortex. What the prefrontal does, instead of executing motor functions, it imagines motor functions. It executes motor functions in abstract. This is something Peterson I heard him talk about. It can imagine motor movements in the context of an environment, and then it tries to predict the results of those movements. And that way, instead of being mad at the 6'5", 300-pound guy that cut in front of us in the grocery line, instead of like pushing him, we go, you know what? I'm willing to be gracious today, and I'm going to let him do that. No problem, no skin off my back. And that way we don't die. We let the guy who pushed the 6'5" guy now dies in our mind instead of us dying in real life. This is a survival impulse. This is literally how we move through the world and into the future. How our physiology was designed. This very delicate, complex dance of our planning center, our signaling center, and then our map of the world. And you can imagine that like it's very, very complex because even in the simple example of the restaurant, like it's kind of we don't really know necessarily. Like sometimes you order the chicken and then you go, oh, you know what? You look at someone else's steak and you're like, damn it, I should have ordered that steak. You predicted wrong. Maybe you predicted the restaurant wrong, but oftentimes you predict what's inside here is wrong. It's kind of this weird thing how you don't know. Like you're just getting these primitive non-linguistic signaling, pictures, sensation, colors, and sounds, and you're taking that and you're trying to turn that into an executable goal, which usually requires language. Like, I want the steak au poivre. How do I do that? I have to, right? And so in a more complex situation, it's like, should I marry this girl or should I not marry this girl? It's like, fuck, I don't know, Or I have this signal of desire, this emptiness inside that I know needs to be filled. How do I fill it? That's kind of like a Shakespearean thing. I don't know how to fill this thing. Or I have this intense limbic desire, right? This impulsive desire. And so you go off and you go off and buy that car, and then now you're bankrupt, or and that's kind of the Shakespearean tragedy where you're just beholden, you're enslaved by your own impulses, and you can't seem to apply the more contextualized rule sets to spin that down, enter into that meditative phase where you're trying to think through the problem and then go with what is the best solution. And by the way, that's kind of a biological case for patience because the DLPFC takes time. It takes time to generate that sophisticated response that's appropriate to the numerous variables and rules that are right in front of you. You know, in the Bible, they have this whole theme about how wisdom calls out to you. She's like this woman standing on a street corner saying, "Hey, like, pay attention." And it's like, you ever had your teacher, you know, when you're in school, and your teacher goes, "What were you thinking?" Like, let's say, I don't know what you did. I remember I pulled a chair out from some kid, and he fell and hit his butt, and I felt terrible. And we're going, what the hell was I thinking? Because I thought the world operated like a cartoon, and that would be really funny, but the reality was that absolutely was not how the world operated. So this delicate dance is really what allows us to, our ability to tell stories, essentially. To tell the right story. Our ability to map out ourselves is incredibly difficult, and that's why we're so obsessed with stories. That's why we watch movie after movie after movie. We tell each other stories. We want to hear stories. The way we learn best is from stories. Describing complex systems is best when it's told in a story. Like, what's a good example? I mean, if I were to say, you know, some things are like riding a bike. You never really forget how to do it. It's like I kind of use a story for that, because you can associate with riding a bike and, oh yeah, you never really figure out how to ride a bike. And I mean, I don't know if it's the best example, but like, stories are the easiest way that we learn. And basically probably what happened was the people who were most entertained by stories were the ones who survived the most, because they told the best stories. They thought about stories. When we encounter difficulties, right, when in that scenario where it's like, oh, I couldn't order the catch of the day or the day boat catch or whatever, you know, that was only mildly disruptive because probably inherently I turned towards higher narratives. Like, the Steve that eats the day boat catch, whether or not that future Steve gets to be lived out or not, is not that important to, like, it's not that important to my life as a whole, because I value much higher narratives than that. Like, I'm still the Steve that was born and raised in Michigan. That's the son of, you know, I'm part of the Lee family. I have all these higher identities, these higher motivations that like the Steve that's able to eat the fish is kind of this much lower sub story within a much larger story. And so, like, if I were to encounter a much more drastic rule change, let's say, you know, my dad goes to me, he's like, "Steve, you know, I'm actually not your father." It'd be like, what the hell just happened? You know, that would be so crazy, because so much of my identity is wrapped up in the fact that I am my dad's son. And I guess that implies the way my dad has taught me, the love that the love that my dad has for me. And then if I had a different father, I'd be like, well, who the hell is that guy? And what is that? Like, it would just be so disruptive. And or if, like, your wife divorced you, right? That is a huge rule change. That's like, there's so much about your life that's dependent upon you being in a loving relationship with your wife, and especially if you have kids. My friend went through a divorce recently, and it was devastating. He thought his life was ruined. I mean, thank God it ended up being the best thing for him. But, you know, it's like, when we have a disruption in narratives, our first instinct is to try to learn, amidst the wreckage of that narrative, is to try to lean on a higher narrative. You know, the reason why when I'm at a restaurant and if I can't, the thing that I ordered isn't there, the reason why I don't completely have a complete, you know, an utter breakdown and spiral, you know, into delinquency and depression, is that, like, it was not that important to my narrative. I didn't hold that narrative. There's nothing else dependent upon that narrative. It's not like if I ate the fish, then I would get that $1 million job and ride, you know, I would get that girl and my life would be perfect because I ate that fish. There's almost nothing dependent on it. I would get a little more protein, but then I could just get the chicken. It's kind of, you know, they're sort of interchangeable. When we have disruptions to our narratives, we lean on higher narratives. And that's what makes religion and these mythologies so attractive and so high stakes, because These are narratives that are very hard to break. Like if I were to say, you know what, God is in control, and let's say I believe that, that's a pretty hard narrative break. Like I could, my whole family could die, and I'd be like, God is in control. Now that would be a pretty tough thing to hold faith in, but like that's the attractiveness of religious narratives, is that they're unbreakable. And then if you have an unbreakable narrative that's highly adaptive to our perception of the world, now often these narratives tell us about the world. Now often these narratives tell us about the world. So like if we can construct a world and construct an identity within that world that is that we view as prosperous and highly adaptive and can't really be broken, I mean, that's a very secure way to move through the world. Because what's hard about having a narrative broken is that, like, that whole identity, that whole future is wiped out. And all the emotional investment and resources incumbent with that future identity, the one that we're living out, is now just completely useless. Like, it just is dangling there. It met all of these desires, right? Because it's a deep narrative. It's one that met several important desires and needs. It probably has, like a marriage especially, has social status implications. It has, I don't know, just a lot of emotional implications. Um, it's like this is your whole life. You know, this formulates the the entirety of a good life in some sense. And when that gets fractured, it's like, where do you go? In some sense, what you want to do is try to fill that space again, because now there's this mold that has no fulfillment. There's nothing filling that mold to complete it. And so you try to look for a new wife, but it's like that other wife, the person that's was married to the other wife, is still kind of there, and like there's this mourning and death process that has to go through. And I think those neurons are literally dying, like that whole physiology that your DLPFC constructed, right? Because it has influence on your physiology, that it's chemically and very physically mobilized, is now completely unnecessary, and actually like it's thrashing around now because it's dying. I mean, it's crazy. And that's why you have all these death and resurrection themes in spiritual literature, to kind of help you contextualize this very painful process. Like when we don't have a narrative that explains what's happening, it's a very insecure feeling, and it's a very dangerous feeling. These are those moments. Those are those moments where it's like anything's possible. Maybe you just have to jump off a cliff. Like, you know, I mean, seriously, like it just gets really dark. You don't know where the hope is. You don't know. So what we do there is we try to, I mean, often that's when people have these spiritual epiphanies, because now they're deeply searching for a narrative that's higher than that, one that they can find refuge in. If you lose that job that where you put your whole reputation on, you stake your identity on, it's the thing that gets you women and gets you friends and gets you the things that you need and helps you pay your rent and helps you live a certain lifestyle and maintain a certain social status, and that job is gone, and let's say you leave it, you lose it in a bout of utter stupidity, like you gambled away, or you tweeted something inappropriate, you got canceled, or you had some sexual whatever. There's, you know, these are all like destructive things to your narratives. And this is the thing, in some sense, that's keeping you alive. This is your survival narrative, right? This is how you've adapted to the world. Now that thing's gone. Now you need to what? Look towards a higher narrative, or something. And so, as I say, like this is epically difficult to do. How to map out the world properly? How to map out these desires properly? I mean, how many times do we think that this is the thing that's going to fulfill us, and we get it, and it doesn't, or we fail in getting it. In Bitcoin, I failed, you know, and that felt like a death. But then I found this new narrative where it's like, now it's like, I'm so glad I failed, because I found this higher narrative. And I think the reason why this hero story is so powerful, why it keeps being told, why it has been told, and we keep telling it, even though we're these super scientific kind of atheistic materialist people is that we sense that the material by itself is not able to fill all these deep desires within us, that there's something, it just feels empty. Like there's this niggling vastness of space inside of us that's completely untouched by, just a paycheck every week and a really nice couch and a great car and even a loving wife. Like that can certainly give you that sense of fulfillment, but sometimes that alone is, and what if you're fighting with your wife? It's not always great, even if you're in a great relationship. And so it's like, we're searching for that story that can fulfill us. We're searching for that perfect map of ourselves that helps us understand what these signals mean. The hero story is saying, hey, this is what that deep signal means. It means you need to move forward into the unknown, just like a hero. That there are demons that you need to confront. There are obstacles that you have to overcome. And there's death and pain that you have to move through in order to get at this emptiness, this desire signal that you have that you don't understand. And it could be that this desire signal has no match in the world that you've constructed, right? I mean, if you have a purely materialist world, these deep desires might be spiritual desires, and you're going to have a really hard time understanding that if you don't have any spirituality in your world. If your world is simply in the material and there's nothing behind that, but the need that you have isn't material, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to figure that one out. And I think it'd be interesting to talk to atheists because I don't know how exactly they move through that. Now, a lot of them do find fulfillment, so I'm not, you know what I mean? But I think you can find refuge in higher narratives still. Like, the hero's narrative can be for anyone. I think you can find refuge in virtues like courage and self-sacrifice. And, if you imitate the character of God, as I would say, then I still think you get the same fulfillment from it. If you imitate the hero, this hero story, this hero's narrative, that you confront your demons, that you see your life in this epic drama, even if you are, you think it's mostly just in the material world, I think you can still get at that. So I think narratives are how we've been constructed. It's how we move through the world. And this hero story, how is this narrative the highest one that matches that matches up our physiology, the most complete narrative that captures our physiology and captures the world and captures how we're supposed to move through that world? Well, we're coming on 54 minutes. Let me do this part, and then we can we'll be more elaborate later. So when we're talking about, let me pull up this quote here. Now, when we're talking about narratives, what we're talking about are motivations. These futures that we spin up they're always centered around an aim. The rule sets and details and things that we model out are always curated according to the motivation. I'm hungry, I want something that will satisfy me. I'm looking through the menu, I'm generating identities that center around a motivation, that center around a number of rule sets, right? And so narratives are identities, which are motivations. They're basically inseparable. I am the son of my father. That implies a certain level of motivation. You have dollars, you have yen, you have Bitcoin, all these different things, and people desire to have these. But it's not the money itself per se. It's the desire that we attach to the money that motivates us to try to acquire that reward, that object. It's a dopaminergic reward. And so if you want to get like meta, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to harvest dopamine, essentially. He says that our notion of power and potential, so if you have a bank account with $1,000,000, that $1,000,000, that value in and of itself it's not valued. It's valued only insofar as the dopaminergic the dopaminergic value that we attach to it. It's an internal motivation and desire and value system that's measured in dopamine. So with $1,000,000 in a bank account, like for some people, like me for example, if I had that, I'd have a pretty high dopaminergic value attached to that. Whereas maybe someone like Bill Gates, if he woke up with $1,000,000 in his bank account, he'd probably jump out of a window. I mean, he used to have $1 billion in there, now he's got $1,000,000. So everything is mediated by dopamine. That our motivations are coined, that they're measured in, that they're... Is there another word for measured in? I think that's it. Yeah, they're coined in dopamine. And so when you're ascertaining what desires to fulfill that, the beautiful girl, the amazing car, the amazing job, right? You're trying to figure out which one you like the most, and you're running these different scenarios. You're trying to find which job. You're inherently, like, you're tapping into your dopamine system. Your DLPFC is aware of the dopamine that you attach. You're consciously aware of the desire that you attach to each of these things. And you're going to have this different dopaminergic value for different things, and everyone's a little bit different. Now, there is some kind of reciprocation in terms of how you negotiate that dopaminergic value, but by and large, it's kind of given to you. I mean, you know, if you're 6'7", maybe you should play basketball. I'm 5'6". I ain't playing no basketball. You know, I mean, thankfully I don't have a very high dopaminergic value on basketball. When I hold a basketball, it's like I'm holding a weird human head or something. Like I really don't know what to do with it. So I'll end with this, and then we'll kind of continue. But within ourselves, obviously, like, we have different dopaminergic values to different things, but there's certain things, desires, there's basic meta desires that we have that we share across humanity. And that's this desire to, from the hero story, it's our desire to conquer our fears, to basically to save our people, to overcome, to step into, I guess, our destiny. Now, from a pure dopamine perspective, there's different kinds of rewards locked within us. Not all dopaminergic rewards are the same. And when you talk about the deepest rewards that are locked within us, you know, we're kind of like this ancient door, where if we perform the right actions in the right sequence at the right time, that's going to unlock these internal rewards, the dopamine that's inside of us. And wouldn't you know, if they did this experiment where they try to figure out what constitutes the greatest rewards. And once again, you know, I don't know how they figured this out, but they're able to do, I think it's called transcranial stimulation, where they hook up different electrodes, I guess, to different parts of the brain where they could trigger certain sensations, and they gave people a choice of what part of the brain they wanted stimulated. And some parts were like intoxication stimuli, anger stimuli, sadness, sexual stimuli, like eating food, like a satiating stimuli from eating food. And they gave people a choice of what feeling do you like the most. And the feeling that people like the most, it wasn't actually any of those things that I mentioned. It wasn't even sexual stimuli, which you would think would be the most positively reinforcing stimulation. The feeling that they liked the most was a part of the brain called the midline thalamus. And so this is kind of an unconscious part of the brain, not the hypothalamus, but the thalamus. And the midline thalamus contains this area called the nucleus reunion. And when they stimulate it, what people felt was mild anticipation or mild frustration combined with anticipation. So it wasn't necessarily a good feeling, but it was very addictive. And people would they call it bar pressing. They would bar press this space. They wanted this stimulation all day long. It's almost like the flirtation process, right? Mild frustration, anticipation. Now, you get this feeling, they've identified this feeling in mice, actually. And when a mouse has this feeling, it's because they're voluntarily approaching something dangerous that they anticipate will yield a reward. So, in order to get this deepest reward within us, the most desirable feeling that we know of, you have to voluntarily. And so, like, the mice weren't just running into danger, like, just running into the jaws of some predator. They were being very strategic. They were cautiously approaching, but they were approaching. You must voluntarily, strategically, thoughtfully, with your DLPFC in the lead, not like a 2-year-old running into danger, aware of the danger, voluntarily move forward towards it. That's how you get this weird tickle, this dopaminergic release from the midline thalamus. That's the most desirable feeling. Now, what does that sound like? That's kind of what a hero does. This is why, partially, I guess, this is why the hero story is so enthralling. It seems to engross the deepest parts of our physiology, and we sense somehow that it gets at that deepest reward locked within us, that most pleasurable feeling that isn't necessarily happiness, it's not even necessarily joy, or it's some combination of excitement, anticipation, and a thrill that we're moving into something that, should we succeed, that will represent something, you know? So this is where we see evidence of that hero story within our physiology. First, it's appropriate that a narrative would be part of our destiny, because that's how we operate through the world anyway. We literally can't coordinate ourselves. We can't regulate all these different parts of ourselves without a story. And then we're involved in this predictive model, and we don't know necessarily which story is going to correctly get us that fulfillment that we want. Either we might have error with the world, we might have error with our ability, we might have an error on what we actually want in the first place. And so we look to stories to help us map out. We always want to improve our maps, right? Flexible rule setting, update our rules. And this ancient story, this hero story, is one that has been evolving for millennia and seems to draw every people group towards it. And so this is that key. This is the key to the ancient door. This is the sequence of actions and motivations and thoughts and events that you must go through to unlock the fullness of your physiology, of who you are. So there you go. That is my scientific proposition, argument, that the hero story, this hero's narrative, is the shape of who we are. This is the story that we need to enact in order to unlock the fullness of who we are and to live a life that we would say is fulfilling, and that we can induce a state of meaning within us, a state of fulfillment in the most sustainable way possible, in the most admirable way possible. And that's completed Lecture 2. In Lecture 3, we're going to talk about the application of this hero story, how this dopaminergic system works, how we can utilize and get in harmony with this system, how we can apply this to the narrative and vice versa. So yeah, that'll be the third part of the lecture, so thanks for listening.